Patron Scholars Program. So if you guys can find a seat. Again, as much distance as you can leave between you and your neighbor, please. So we like to ask for every 2 seats in between, and then skipping every other row as best you can, or staggering if you are kind of together. There's some space down here in the front if anybody's still looking for a spot. So just, grab a seat. And welcome to Scholars Presentations for the class of 2021. I would like to begin tonight like we begin all events at Bishop Kelly, and that is with prayer. So if you'll please join me in prayer. Let us remember that we are always and everywhere in the holy presence of God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. God of all, we give you thanks for the occasion to gather this evening. We are grateful for the gifts that you have given us and for the opportunity to be a part of the Bishop Kelly community. You have generously blessed these students, Anthony, Greg, Abigail, and Aiden. Touch their hearts so that they can use their talents for the benefit of others and guide their path as they become the people that you call them to be. We offer this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. Mary, Queen of Peace, pray for us. St. John Baptist de La Salle, pray for us. Live Jesus in our hearts forever. So one of the new things that I'm going to do, because it's 2020, right? Or I guess it's 2021, but it doesn't change anything. For the purposes of contact tracing, everybody smile and wave, because I get to take a lovely video of everyone who's here. So welcome to Scholars Presentations 2020. Very exciting times. Okay. All right, so now that business is out of the way, without further ado, we are going to get started. So our first presenter of the night is Anthony Fadagante. Anthony is the son of Carrie and James. In addition to being a Brother Bernardine Scholar, he's a member of the track and field team, the Latin Club president, received the level of distinction as a member of the speech and debate team, and has been a peer mentor. As the Veterans Coordinator for NHS, Anthony was in charge of organizing the Veterans Day Remembrance for the Bishop Kelly community. In his free time, he loves to work on his 1983 Bronco, play guitar, hang out with his friends, and volunteer at his parish, St. Clement's in Bixby. Anthony has applied to the University of Tulsa in Benedictine and will most likely attend to you in the fall and plans to study engineering. So, without further ado, Anthony Fadagante.
Hello, my name is Anthony Fadagante. My project is the Leave Alzheimer's in the Dust car show. So, for some background, my grandmother, she had Alzheimer's. So for about the past decade, she's struggled through the disease. And essentially, it's a degenerative brain disease, as you can see in the picture, that essentially eats away at the brain. So people who have Alzheimer's will lose their memories and often lose their function as they progress through the disease. So as she progressed through this, the whole family gets affected because the effects can be pretty devastating, especially to those who have known people for a long time. So currently, there is no cure for Alzheimer's. And I was introduced to the philanthropy for Alzheimer's through the Walk for Alzheimer's at TU. Essentially every year. They didn't do it last year, but there's a walk in remembrance of those who care for or have Alzheimer's. And so one of my initial goals was to donate through the Walk for Alzheimer's, but since that didn't happen, that's not what I ended up doing. So for some starting statistics, currently over 5 million Americans have Alzheimer's. It's the 6th leading cause of death. 1 in 3 seniors die with Alzheimer's or another dementia. And by 2050, there are projected to be 14 million people with Alzheimer's. So initially for my project, I was thinking something correlated because I've always liked also, I thought about doing a fundraiser. So I decided to combine the two and do a car show that raised money for Alzheimer's. So my initial goals were to raise around $1,500 to $2,500 to have a pretty full parking lot and have sponsors for the show. Because often in car shows, there will be a restaurant nearby that will pay for the food, or not pay for the food, they will allow people to come in and essentially profit off the show. So some of the basics about the project: my show happened on August 1st. It was at the Brookside Church on Peoria. There were multiple car clubs in attendance, such as the Dodge Club and the Pontiac Club. And I will get into the advertising. So to actually promote and reach the fundraising goals, there were multiple incentives at the show. So there was a silent auction, there were OSU and OU buckets that people could just toss money in, and there's a $5 entry fee. So for the auction items, me and my family traveled to businesses, or we contacted individuals to see if they would be willing to donate. So the kind of items that we had at the silent auction were free car washes, free car detailings, car wash kits, photography session, free month of gymnastics, just to name some. And then for advertising, the same businesses that we asked for donations from, we would give flyers to so they can put them out. And also in person at the Tulsa Tuesday Cruise, I went a few times to hand out flyers there also. And then on Facebook, there's also multiple car clubs that promote car shows on there, so I posted on there as well. And also my uncle, who's a member of the Pontiac Club, told his whole club about it. So, and this is more of the soliciting. We took cash, checks, and the auction items, and those are some of the notable sponsors of the show. So several restaurants on Peoria, multiple car places, Knights of Columbus from St. Clements. The turnout, there were over 30 cars, and there were around 50 to 100 people. The local Dodge Club was one of the main participating groups. And with COVID and everything combined, it was a pretty good turnout to have for that day, because it was a one-off event that wasn't already established. So there weren't people that I could be sure were going. So as for some of the hiccups that happened, COVID was the main one, as you might be able to guess. The initial date was last year in March. But that's when COVID and the city started shutting down, so we pushed it back indefinitely. And then the initial venue was on the Marquette Memorial. And that also, once I could have it, was essentially I was not allowed to do it there anymore, so I had to find a new place. Then getting insurance for the show, when I was at the Marquette Memorial location, I had to have insurance for it, but the owner of the place said that they would donate the insurance for me. And then the other hiccup was participation. Since it's a one-off event that's not planned, I wasn't going to be sure how many people were actually going to show up. So what I learned from some of those hiccups was that larger scale events take a lot of preparation. There's a lot of groundwork when you're not an established organization or event. So these are some of the pictures from the show. The Brookside Church did, they put a sign up on their marquee to advertise for about a week. There were several BK families there, but largely it was just people who found it through advertising. And then the show ended with an awards ceremony. So not all car shows have this, but it's an incentive to get people to show up. Essentially, either a group of judges or just anybody who shows up at the show can vote on their favorite cars. So in my show, it was just popular vote. So whoever showed up, they paid the entry fee, they got a ballot, and they could choose their 5 favorite cars. And then throughout the show, we counted to see who had the most votes. So to prepare for that, I wrote 16 trophies, 15 that were best in class and 1 best in show. And so at the end of the show, everybody could come and grab their auction items, and then they could receive a trophy if they were voted on. So the grand total, we raised over $2,800 through the show and afterwards, because even after the show, several people still gave money. So the way that I donated the money was through the Alzheimer's Association of Oklahoma at the local branch. But since the branch was closed from COVID, we met a representative in Tulsa Hills, and she essentially just put all the money through the Alzheimer's app, and that was about it. So she named, our team name was Team Jody, based after my grandmother. So the team raised over $2,800, which was over my initial goals even before COVID. And it was pretty good turnout overall. So as for thank yous, I'd like to thank my family. They helped me with a lot of the groundwork, and with the soliciting and the advertising. Coach Fraley, who is my mentor, Mrs. Tyler for leading the program, my friends who helped me set up and take down the car show up throughout it, the Brookside Church for allowing me to use the lot, and for putting the advertisement on their billboard. And then to all the local car clubs and businesses for donation and participation, especially Trey's Bar and Grill, who the manager was sort of a mentor for me and also made a donation. So, thank you. Anybody have any questions?
What is your favorite car show? Besides your own wrong.
I like the Purple Challenger. That was the old one.
How many car shows have you been to? Do you know?
Maybe around 20 or so.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Excellent. Or would you mind joining us? We're having a discussion down here. Greg's parents are stuck in traffic. Oh, wait.
One of them made it. They're almost here, though.
Oh,
They're
okay.
getting close.
So if we might, can we change up the order? Are you okay with that? I don't know. Everybody's looking at me like deer in the headlights.
I appreciate you asking, though.
You what?
Said I appreciate you asking.
Would you? Okay. Perfect. All right. So change in the program. Well, we definitely we want your parents to see, right? We want them to be here, and I know they're working really hard to make that happen. So thank you, Anthony. I attended Anthony's car show, and it was spectacular. I won a car wash in the silent auction, and then about 2 days later, had a car accident, and so have still not been able to use my car wash, but it is sitting on a shelf. I am ready. I'm very excited about it. I look at it all the time and think, ooh, I'm gonna get that. So one of these days, I'm gonna go. Okay. Let me figure out how to, for some reason, yours doesn't want to let me do this. There we go. Okay. So in changing the order, we'll switch, and we're gonna switch to what would have been our last presentation of the night, which is Aiden Rain. Aiden's parents are Kathleen and Randall. At Bishop Kelly, Aiden is an active member of the music department, as a member of men's choir, jazz choir, and is currently participating in the Spring Play and Musical. Aiden is an integral member of the academic bowl team, serving as a captain for most of his years at Bishop Kelly, earning 2 state titles. In his free time, Aiden enjoys writing, music, reading video games, and trying recipes featured on Kay's Cooking. He is a member of St. Benedict's Parish, where he sings with the choir. Aiden will attend KU in the fall and plans to study anthropology. So without further ado, Aiden Wright.
growing up. I guess I'll just get right into it. I'll start with a quote. We live in a world where there's more and more information and less meaning. Now, take a minute to think about that for a second. It might not seem right at first, but then kind of think back in the last 2 or 3 years and realize everything that's happened. All the stories you're kind of glossing over, you can't remember that have happened, and you don't really want to remember. Now, this quote comes from the 54th page of a book called Simulacra and Simulation by French philosopher Jean Baudrillard. And it's a fascinating book, but it's also the worst book that I've ever read. It's incredibly difficult to read. He's French, obviously, so in translation, a lot gets lost. That's a good movie, by the way. But I didn't just read this book for this project. I also read a different book, also analyzing media and the way it can manipulate information in order to, condition people to think what they want. And it's called Manufacturing Consent, the Political Economy of the Mass Media. This is a pretty famous, well-known book. It's by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman. And basically what it does is it just runs through the later half of the 20th century and essentially lists all the things that media does and did to kind of forgive America mostly for a lot of its crimes against humanity around the world. But it's also an in-depth look at how propaganda works in a first world country that we'd rather like to think is actually on the good side of things. Now, I was left with this question. How in the world are we still here? After reading those books, after watching hours and hours of news stories, looking at the world in general, how? How did Donald Trump become president? How did Biden become the president of a quote-unquote progressive party? How are we, 200,000 deaths at this point from COVID? Okay, that's even worse. This is the question I was left with, and it still haunts me. So I'm going to play a little video clip, and I want you to think about this. He is a progressive candidate right now, and this is something he said on the 18th of November, 1993 on the Senate floor. It'll play, which it's not. Oh, and just yeah.
Hit escape,
Yeah.
and now it's on, and it'll open a new window.
Come on. You have a vote? Nah. This is annoying. This worked in testing. It's unfortunate. But anyway, long story short, TDLR. This clip is from his speech on the Senate floor where he advocates for his crime bill, which was one of the biggest legislative disasters in American history. Basically, it was a bill that made the prison system incredibly worse for particularly African American communities. Sentencing became harsher and often longer. You could be incarcerated for basically no reason. And it heightened what had become a prison industrial complex in America. And I looked at that and I thought, how in the world, especially now, how is he president of the Democratic Party? You know, when Bernie Sanders was running against him. So let's get into the actual project now that I've kind of done the little spiel about news sucks. I had to do a lot of research for this, a lot of reading, and hours of watching news, which was the worst experience of my entire life. So I kind of divided my research into two categories there. Theoretical research, reading, manufacturing consent, simulacra simulation, a couple of articles and papers, and then of course watching the news. And I cannot stress this enough how much I hated these people by the end of this. I can't stand their faces anymore. It's just, after imbibing hours and hours and video after video and segment after segment, I just could not stand. I mean, I can barely look at the slide on the computer here. But like how there are so many anchors, so many stories, it's the sheer magnitude of the amount of information that we're given nowadays. It's almost impossible to digest. And that brings me to this. This is, we were all it was suggested to us to use a Brother Bernardine quote in every presentation, all of our presentations. This is mine. I believe this is number 304 in your little book of Brother Bernardine quotes. But it's basically, what I'm trying to say here is that news media, as much as it has something to say, it really likes caring about how it says it. What it doesn't say, what particular words it uses. So, for example, in Hurricane Katrina, people who were looting Walmarts after the floods had very different words used for them if they were white or black. Looting was the term if you were African American, and salvaging was the term if you were white. And there's, hopefully you can notice there's a kind of bias there. But stuff like that, if you can twist a story with just words, and that's really comes to the root of my project. I started this as a linguistic experiment. I mean, I wanted to analyze language. I wanted to analyze how it's manipulated, how it's used to not only give you the information that you kind of search for on an evening news station, but also convince you to a broader worldview that doesn't really come from the facts themselves. Now, when I did this, of course, I really did not realize how much stuff there was. A lot of these faces you recognize. There is a malnourished child, which is from the current humanitarian crisis in Yemen, which I don't know how many of you have heard of that. But it's been going on for a long time, and I've only been seeing news coverage of it for the last month or so. The not Hong Kong riots, but the BLM protests and riots, which is still going on now. Notre Dame on fire, Australia on fire, California on fire, Jeffrey Epstein, George Floyd, the coronavirus, of course, makes its appearance. The picture there is from the top middle is from the Charlottesville rally. There's a picture from the U.S. internment camps at the border. There's the Mueller report, if you remember that one. That was a fun little time, wasn't it? Benjamin Netanyahu got indicted for fraud, and no one cared. There's, of course, Hurricane Harvey on the bottom left. But this is just probably, I estimate this is less than a fourth of the news stories that were told in the last, I don't know, 3.5 or so years when I really started focusing on what I wanted to do here. And that's how I really came to my thesis. We have so much information, but less and less meaning. We're inundated with facts and data, and it kind of, it's like eating too much. You know, you can't digest all that food in the same time. The rate at which you can actually process the information you're given is not the same rate at which you are eating it. And by doing so, we stop caring. Back to those books that I read, Chomsky and Herman would like to think that we're just fed propaganda all the time, that every news story that we're fed has a twist in it pre-made. And of course that's true, but Baudrillard, the other book, Simulacrum and Simulation, would probably argue that it doesn't really matter about the actual bias that's in the news story, but more the fact that because we can't process it, it doesn't matter. Instead of being convinced of a worldview, we're being conditioned not to care about it. And that's pretty dangerous, not caring in a world like this. But anyway, so what about video? So my project is a kind of satirical reproduction of your evening news segment. I decided that the only way to kind of get through and describe what I meant truly was by reproducing what I was seeing. And of course, it's difficult to just flat reproduce something both legally and mentally. So I decided to make kind of a comedy about it. And that required a lot of skills that I had not acquired over my 18 years of existence on this planet. First and foremost of which, character study, or acting. In this case, I have never acted before in my life, and it was far more difficult than I thought it would be. First of all, I had to, again, imbibe hours and hours of news segments, and then I had to make these characters about these news anchors that I had been watching for hours, and then I had to play them. It was strange to me. I'd never really taken off my own skin and put someone else's on before like that. In other words, I'm not this guy. This is one of the best actors out there, Daniel Day-Lewis. Check out his movies, it's great. But aside from acting, there's of course the other part, which is recording and editing. Recording was pretty easy once you got the acting down. It's just set up your camera, record until you get a good take. It's really the editing that really kills you. So on your right there, I believe, yeah, that's the stack of books that I put up to prop up my phone to record a lot of it. Yeah, it was a lot of fun trying to gather all those books and stack them so they wouldn't fall over. But on your left, there's a video, that's a picture of my editing software, Lightworks. It's a free software. People don't want to pay money for like Adobe Premiere or something. But editing it's actually a lot of fun. Editing it's like a jigsaw puzzle almost. You get to put clips and audio and video and pictures and so on and so forth together until you get a nice kind of complete picture. But it also takes forever, especially with a video longer than 10 minutes. So editing process is very, it kills you. It's so tiring. But it's a lot of fun in the moment, I'd say. So why care about my project? I mean, my project wasn't raising money for Alzheimer's, you know. It wasn't something that kind of really had that physical impact, I guess, and that question haunted me this whole time. You know, why is this important? You know, I like what I'm doing, I think it's interesting, but why should you? And I think you should care. I have a quote from Manufacturing Consent here. It's, furthermore, in a system of high and growing inequality, entertainment is the contemporary equivalent of Roman games of circus. It diverts the public from politics and generates a political apathy that is helpful to the preservation of the status quo. And as I said earlier, the status quo isn't great. If we do not care about our world and what's happening in it, and if we're conditioned not to care by the news media that we imbibe and digest, it spells the doom for modern civilization as we know it. Lethargy is, I can't remember where I got this quote, but like lethargy is the lifeblood of decay. It's, if we don't care and if we don't, you know, obviously this is being cognizant of all this is one thing, but acting on it is another thing. What I would say is when you go home and watch it, put on Fox News or CNN and, for your background noise, I would not do that, because background noise for news is exactly what they want. They don't want you to care what was actually being said, and it goes right through one ear and out the other. But here's all my resources, my quotes, my citations for my information. If you want any of these, you can like email me, I guess, to my main at fisherplay.org. More resources. And then just a thank you. For those of you who were in touch with me and involved with this project, you know that I was not great with this. I was not very responsive. I was incommunicado most of the time, but every email that I got encouraged me to keep working on it, so thank you very much. And of course, the internet, the great archive of information that it is, and the cursed place that I live on. Joel Aldridge actually helped me kind of kickstart my project and give me some ideas for what I wanted to do. And then just Mrs. Bendel, Mrs. Tyler, Mr. Frank, kind of people, the teachers and mentors that helped me out. And of course, friends and family, become friends and family. That's kind of how it works. So thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Eric.
So, in your research, was there any part of psychology that you found maybe played into what you were studying?
So yeah, when I was researching, I kind of thought to myself, a lot of my time with this was figuring out what my scope was going to be. Because originally I wanted to do a project about language itself, and that proved far too broad. So I got it down to political speech, and even that was a bit too difficult. And so I did have psychology kind of floating around in my head. Do I want to put down a little slide or whatever about the psychology of news media? And when I got down to it, really the psychology of news media is a lot of the time the same as the psychology of most television. It's mindless entertainment. And so I read a few articles. I think there was it might have been a Chomsky article, because he does cognitive psychology. About it, and very interesting psychology of mindless entertainment, as I said. It's at the same time very affecting on the brain and also nothing. It's empty, it's floating signifiers, I think is what it's called in more linguistic terms. But I decided against focusing too much on psychology because I just thought the scope needed to be narrowed even further than it was. the first thing you can do is diversify. I know it's been a strange thing realizing that we kind of have like personalities based off whether you watch CNN or Fox News. And the first thing I would do is definitely diversify your news media. If you only watch Fox News because that's just the easiest channel to turn to, watch MSNBC, CNN, or read BBC articles instead every once in a while. Just diversify what you're getting to break up the monotony of the news media you get, if anything. And then secondly is, if you see something if you see your friends and family regurgitating or spouting out some of the stuff you see in the news that you hopefully know is wrong or misleading, correct them. Again, apathy is not helping. If you can help correct other people, and of course this is kind of what I'm doing right now, is if I can show other people how terrible all this is and how to kind of fix it, then I mean, first of all, their lives are going to get better. I mean, God knows I hate watching all that news. So yeah, I definitely say first thing is diversify your news because first of all, perspective is huge. Foreign perspectives, of course, political perspective, racial perspectives. So things like, of course, AP is a great resource because a lot of the times the news you get is from the same 3 or 4 sources, and AP is a huge one, and so getting it directly from the horse's mouth is oftentimes far more informative and wastes less of your time. But yeah, I mean, I'd say that's probably the most fundamental thing you could do. Yes, right? Yeah, that's a tough one. So, see, the books were, so the first book was only about 100 pages long. That's not terrible. Manufacturing Consent's a fair bit longer. I would say that I like reading, and I can like take notes and underline and put in the margins and whatever. So I think the reading was a lot more fun. It wasn't enjoyable in the moment, I think, but once I finished the book, it's like, oh yeah, I just read a book. Kind of check that box. And there's some interesting stuff in there, obviously. And then just oppose that with the news. It's just mindless hours of people talking. It's same deal over and over again usually. So I'd say the reading is better. Well, thank you.
All right. You got to order stuff.
Yeah. Order it.
Well, I apologize, Aiden, if your video didn't work. It did in rehearsal, so I apologize for that. While we're talking here. Okay, so our next presenter is going to be. Okay. Greg's parents are Todd and Jean. At Bishop Kelly, Greg is the vice president of Latin Club. He's a discus and shot put thrower on the track team. He's a member of FCA, NHS, Comets in Action, and Ultimate Frisbee Club. Greg is a National Merit semifinalist. He enjoys video games, working outdoors, completing landscaping projects, watching movies, and socializing with his friends. He likes to volunteer downtown for Father Sweet, handing out water and food to the homeless. Greg is a member of St. Benedict's Parish in Broken Arrow. In the fall, he will attend OSU and plans to study electrical and computer engineering. Excellent. Without further ado, Mr. Greg.
Good evening, everyone. One day in middle school, I was in Reno, Oklahoma to take some tests for the Contest of Champions. These are just some standardized tests to kind of scale you across across Oklahoma, kind of rank you. But on Sunday, I was finished with my tests, and I was sitting there with my buddy Anthony, and his family goes, "Well, both of you are done with your tests. Would you like to go to a car show?" I had no idea about cars back then, and I went. So I walked around that day, looking at various cars, various car engines, various colors, lots of chrome, and you know what, I was clueless. I did not know what was going on. So that kind of leads as a preface to how I got here. So, like I said, I went to that car show, I had no clue what was going on. And then, come around with Brother Bernadine, sophomore year, they assigned you a research paper. And I knew kind of exactly what I wanted to research was how in the world a car works, because it was interesting to me, and my friends were interested in it, but boy, did I have no clue what was going on. So I decided to spend the first 10 pages of this research paper, or the 10 pages of this research paper rather, kind of looking into how a car turns gasoline into rotational energy to push a car. And so I wrote that 10-page paper and I gained quite a bit of knowledge. And then junior year they said, hey, you need to do a better capstone project, and I went with a research paper because that sounded like the path of least resistance. So I only had 10 pages left, and I told me how you need to write this in an argumentative stance. And now, what could I turn cars into that would be argumentative rather than the biggest battle in cars of electric versus gasoline? I don't know if you all know that, but that is very big in especially racing. So that basically set my path for my research paper. My capstone project is what would be the future of economy cars, mostly your daily drivers, in the future. So to understand how I could even set a standard, I had to understand how each of them worked. So I will bring you through what I learned about industrial or internal combustion engines, also known as ICE engines. So most of you guys are familiar with these. These are what are in most of your cars, because they use gasoline or compressed natural gas to push your car. And there's 3 types of engine blocks. You have the inline, which is on the left, and that, I mean, is as simple as it gets because it is in a straight line. You have the V, which is in the bottom. You just put 2 inlines in a V with an angle in the middle. And finally, a boxer, which is basically just a V but squashed down to 180 degrees. And so, how do you turn a hunk of metal with a bunch of air and gasoline into energy, honestly? So, what I learned is that there's a firing motor with pistons to start moving your crankshaft inside your engine. So if we look at this first piston here all the way on the left, you can see that it's expelling air, now intaking air, and it compresses. So there's 4 steps. It brings air into the piston, or into the cylinder, it compresses the air and adds gasoline, and then it ignites and then pushes all that air out so it can do it all over again. So as you watch, you can kind of see some of the stages going on in the center presentation, and you can see that as it pushes down a piston, it goes through that green rod to the blue crankshaft, which is the main center of, or the main start of rotational energy. And so, just as a summary, as I learned from how a gasoline engine goes from gas to moving wheels, it starts at the crankshaft where we just saw it spinning around due to the pistons, and the crankshaft goes into the clutch, which is just a partition that allows the crankshaft to spin and the transmission to actually change gears. And the transmission, like I said, just changes gears so that you can change the torque and the wheel speed so you're not revving at 12,000 RPM on the highway and burning all of your gas. And then finally goes transmission to the differential, where it splits the axle so that when you're turning in a circle or turning at a stoplight, you're not skipping gears or skipping teeth on your transmission gears. Yes. And then finally, it hits the wheels and turns to the ground and you start pushing. Now on the opposite end, an electric car has none of that and is much different. So instead of gasoline, it uses huge battery packs and massive motors. Now what you see there on your screen is actually an industrial motor that's used maybe for moving industrial packages in a warehouse or of some sort, because they have a lot of torque. But how does this work? So I kind of had no clue where to go with this because it's a lot to take in via electricity. And I went to my mentor, Mrs. Othon, and she gave me 4 YouTube videos and said, watch these. And honestly, those were pretty good too, so kudos. Anyways, so if we're looking at this diagram on the left, you'll see 3 major things. You have a battery, you have a magnetic field, and you have a wire. So basically, there's a wacky principle in physics that if you have a magnetic field and a current running through a wire, the wire will jiggle. And so some crazy guy with a lot of time on his hands figured out how to harness this and started using the motion, the jiggling, to create circular motion. So this is the most simple motor that you can find in the electrical motor spectrum. And it is simple, doesn't have a whole lot of power. As you can see, there's only 1 wire, not a whole lot going on. And here's an animation. As you can see, the motor has a split, or the wire has a split where the battery attaches so that the current can flip every turn, so it actually has constant rotation. So as you can see, that will keep rotating given power. But unfortunately for me, that's not even close to what electrical cars use because they're not powerful enough. And also, if you're plugging it into your wall, you're not going to get direct current, which batteries store. Anyways, electric cars use induction motors, which use an even wackier principle and alternating current to make electromagnets, which is in the center there, that's turning, or that's stationary, I mean. And you can see that the north keeps moving while south chases it. That's kind of, as you can see, how induction motors work. They just keep rotating poles until the thing keeps moving. So then, as a rundown from battery to wheels, like we did the gas engine, we go from the battery to the transformer, which takes the DC power that battery stores, changes it to alternating current that the motor needs to work. And then the motor, or the transformer, then goes into the motor, and the motor starts turning the axle. But there is a caveat, because if you have a single motor powering 2 wheels, you have to put it into a transmission like a gas engine, because it only has 1 input and you don't want to be clicking teeth while you turn. So it'll go into a differential, or if you've got a higher end vehicle, they'll just go motor into wheel because they've got more than 1 motor. So how does all of this come into my thesis? Well, I say electric cars will be the future of economy cars. And as I put here, the future is about 50 years, give or take, probably about 10 years, because that will give electricity enough time to evolve. So start off, what is an economy car? We've got a few definitions. All of them boil down to small, doesn't use much gas, and gets you from point A to point B. Typically don't look that good. But you'll notice, why do I have my own definition on this? And take you back to when I said economy cars couldn't look beautiful. There's me and my friends. Stand still on my Civic. So, I mean, watch your language when you say economy cars aren't beautiful. So, when I'm comparing electric and gasoline cars for the future, how would I compare this? And I found that the basis is basically the entire point of an economy car. Just gets you from here to there, so what's the range, and how much dough do you have to fork out to get this vehicle? And so I did a little bit of researching, and I found a few of the pinnacle economy car, I believe hybrids, I think these top 2 are, because very few electric cars or economy cars are fully electric, because they just don't have the range. And if we look at this spreadsheet, the range is always less for an electric car, but but costs more. So how in the world can I look at this and say, yeah, electricity will be better? And that kind of comes down to where electricity and electrical cars are going as of now. So just to begin with, if an electric car, fully electric car doesn't even get you there, a hybrid will get you there, because that will already cut down how much gas you use, and it will still get you there for the same time, I guess. But looking at this, what can I use to kind of look at and say this is getting better? And that's honestly the brand Tesla. And at this point, Tesla is pushing out the best electric cars for kind of their price range and what they do. And it's more than just changing the fuel to electricity, because the world seems to be getting a lot more green and more conscious about their carbon footprint. So Tesla is even more than just changing to electricity, but rather they're adding features, and mostly self-driving. That is one of the biggest innovations Tesla's come out with to push electric cars into the market today. And on top of that, they're increasing the range of their electric vehicles, especially with the Cybertruck that came out in 2019. Their top package had about 500 miles on a full charge. And that is a lot of range for an electric vehicle, just a vehicle in general. And as they stand, Teslas are getting cheaper for the range that they are pushing out. And I've also put the note that not all economy cars are bought new. Many people buy used cars, and that actually just makes electric cars even cheaper. And why else would an electric car be better? And that would be convenience. So if we think about 1960s, I think, we used to have those huge TVs out in the living room, and they had all those dials to turn the channels, and we got lazy enough to turn it into a remote. Why wouldn't that translate over and make more convenience into the automotive scope? And that's just because it's very easy to just plug in your car at night and wake up to a full car and drive wherever the heck you want in the morning. And the only thing one of my friends had pointed out when I was studying this was, why don't you look into compressed natural gas and how that works, because I feel like that's going to be on the rise. He's wrong, and I don't have the heart to tell him, because CNG cars are slightly more expensive as of right now for less range, and there are no stations around Tulsa. I don't know if you've noticed and just turned the corner and saw a compressed natural gas station. You just don't see that. So it's just not convenient. Why would we even go more inconvenient for our cars? And that brings me to the point that we're talking about an economy car. And what you're really using your economy car is from getting home to work, to your kid's soccer game, back home, maybe to Walmart, get some groceries. And at this point, that's not more than 100 miles that you'll ever need on a daily basis. So almost already the cars from earlier that had kind of poor range compared to all the other cars, they still are viable options for daily drivers. And then also, the fuel is cheaper, moderately. If we do a little bit of math from the statistics online, thank you, Internet, that there's about 13,000 miles a year, and I'm going to be generous and say there's 30 miles per gallon at $1.80, which is kind of about right for us, and that's $67.50 a month, give or take maybe about $5. But if we look at, I looked up how much a Tesla would cost, and then it's about $50 a month to fill your car up every day. And I mean every day you can take it where you like. And even then, following trends, Tesla is increasing their ranges. And if we look back at even the history of internal combustion cars, we'll see that those things had poor range at the Model T, but in 100 years they already came out with, a Honda Civic. But at this point, we're still in the first 20, 25 years of actual electrical car progression. And so, to conclude, I'd like to thank especially my mom and my dad for supporting me and helping me find some people that would actually help me to do research and figure out how the car would work. And I would like to thank my friends Anthony and Seth. Anthony, one, for bringing me to the car meet. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Seth for kind of furthering my interest in cars and keep showing me random vehicles as I jump down the rabbit hole. I'd like to thank gearheads in general, and especially the 4 or 5 that I visited and saw their garages and their project cars. And especially like Anthony's car show, that was a great experience for me that he had for his Alzheimer's research, for Alzheimer's fundraiser. That was a great experience. I'd like to thank Mrs. Othon again for the mentoring and the videos for electricity and how electric motors work. I'd like to thank Stephanie Norton because as I was doing research, she has a Tesla for a daily driver, and I interviewed her and for my research paper. So I'd like to thank her for her personal story. And I'd like to thank Mrs. Tyler, Mrs. Bindle, and Mr. Manning for their help and support in the Brother Bernadine program. All right, do we have any questions?
I do. Are there any changes that you think need to be made to infrastructure if we move toward electric? Like, are there going to need to be charging stations like there are at Whole Foods? Are we going to see more of this?
Well, as I was saying, there isn't at this point a range that you have to drive from your house to Whole Foods that would necessarily need a charging station. And now one point that I asked Mrs. Norton about her Tesla is like how she takes it on far trips, and she says she doesn't. Now that's kind of what I'm saying. You're not going to use your economy car for trips. But as for Whole Foods, I don't think you will because it's maybe not even 15 miles from your house, and that is comfortably in the range of every electric car even now. Yes, Aiden? Well, I'd have to say that would definitely shape politics because a lot of politicians have some tie to oil or gas. But I'd say at this point, it's not, I think it is kind of becoming a threat to especially these politicians and big companies that require oil. But I can't say for certain how it will affect the landscape in general, but it will, I guess, make people more happy at home when they don't have to go out and get gas the next day. Thank you.
Do you ever see a point where it will be more than economy cars that are electric? Like, based on your research, are we headed towards a fully electric car world?
Well, as I said in my trends, I think at one point, yeah, it probably will be. Especially with that Cybertruck, their top package was $80,000. Now that's way out of a lot of the price budget for an economy car, but that, like I said, it did have 500 miles of range, and that's quite a bit. I could probably get you to Branson, but at this point, it's not. Once we get enough chargers along the way and make it fast enough to charge, then yes, it would definitely be a viable solution. Yes, Bella.
Are at-home chargers more popular or public chargers more popular?
I would say at this point, at-home chargers are very much more popular because when you buy a Tesla, I'm pretty sure they will give you a conversion kit and you can put a charger in your garage and just charge overnight. Aaron?
I think they charge overnight, but is there like an approximation to how much time it takes to fully charge an electric car?
I know it's more than a stop at like Wendy's on a long trip, so I would say I think 4 hours is like a full charge on a Tesla. So yeah, it's 4 hours, but it's also to get 500 miles back. So like I said, overnight that's plenty of time, but it's inconvenient on long drives. Thank you very much.
saw this at the inauguration, and I thought, oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought about that. I hadn't thought about wiping down my computer and realized I probably should take some wipes and do that. Okay. All right. Abigail is the daughter of Jan and Jeff Mills. She is the captain of the cross-country team, both her junior and senior year. She has won 4 state titles, all 4 years. She's a member of the track team, a lane crew leader, a member of the Athletic Leadership Council. She was awarded the Most Valuable Comment her junior year for cross-country, Outstanding Sophomore Honors English Student. She's a member of NHS, a National Merit semifinalist. In her free time, Abigail enjoys playing with her golden retriever, spending time with her friends and family, and reading. She attends St. Mary's Parish, where she loves teaching Bible school in the summer. Did you get to teach last summer? Yeah. Hopefully this summer. In the fall, she plans to attend Baylor University, where she will study biology for the moment. So without further ado, Ms. Abigail Mills.
Okay. Hi everyone. So I think that most of you who know me probably also know that I want to be a doctor, pretty common knowledge. And so with 2 sisters in medical school right now, I kind of have spent a lot of time listening to them talk about all these diseases that I definitely don't have a prayer of pronouncing because they're all like 20 letters long. But throughout this time, this has just made me a lot more interested in the medical field and has kindled my desire to be a doctor. When I was young, I heard about these programs like Doctors Without Borders, all these programs that are basically organizations with doctors who are devoted to going to low-income countries, developing countries, and donating their time to people who can't afford or access proper health care. So I kind of wanted to incorporate that into my project. And that's also something that I want to be able to do in the future to help out with people who can't afford or access healthcare. So something that was important for me in this project was kind of figuring out what these countries needed and learning about the struggles of these countries, because that's kind of the first step to being able to help. So yeah, originally I was actually going to do something different for my project. It was going to involve running, so a completely different topic. But obviously when we didn't come back after spring break, that ended up not working out. So this project, I wrote my sophomore year research paper about health challenges in developing countries. So for this year, I just expanded that and added everyone's current favorite topic, which is the coronavirus. So I've kind of talked about why this project is important to me and why I want to know about it, but for sort of world impact and why I think everyone else should know about it. Health problems in developing countries aren't discussed very often, so I'm sure you guys have seen so many news reports about the coronavirus at this point that you probably don't ever want to turn on the news again. But you probably haven't seen very many news reports about coronavirus in developing countries, so I thought it was kind of important to draw attention to this problem because a lot of people haven't heard about it. And a lot of the other health issues that I'm going to talk about in this presentation actually affect up to 1/3 of the world population, so over 2 billion people. So a pretty large-scale problem. So I'm just going to hit kind of the high points of the paper that I wrote. So first off, I wrote about a lot of the factors that contribute to health challenges in these countries. So first off, this one's probably pretty obvious, but lack of sanitation and clean water. So a lot of developing countries actually don't have proper sanitation facilities, so like toilets, sewage systems, and that actually results in open defecation and improper waste disposal. And those things are obviously going to cause contamination of water sources and food sources. And with contamination is going to come a lot of diarrheal diseases, so like cholera, dysentery, things that we don't hear about in the United States very often, but are a lot more common in developing countries. And these things cause pretty high rates of childhood mortality. So next, a lot of developing countries and low-income areas have limited access to treatment and preventative measures. So if you think about vaccines here, most people are vaccinated as a baby against diseases like polio and tetanus, things that we don't ever hear about happening here because everyone's been vaccinated against them. And we have enough people vaccinated to where we reach herd immunity. But in developing countries, a lot of people don't have access to vaccines. So these diseases that are pretty much unheard of in the US are actually a lot more common in these places. People also don't have access to regular checkups. So where diseases like cancer would be discovered pretty early in the United States and they're treatable, they might not be treatable in other countries. Also inability to purchase drugs and treatment. So kind of same category. If people can't, a lot of people in developing countries can't purchase drugs or they can't access them, so they're not able to treat curable diseases. Next, environmental problems. So as these countries are getting bigger, the infrastructure is expanding, but when cities and buildings and roads are expanded, a lot of the time, the materials used to build them are unsafe if they're expanding too quickly, so this results in much higher rates of car accidents. Also, unsafe chemicals used in industrial production results in air pollution, which can obviously result in lung disease and respiratory problems. Also, this air pollution causes unsustainable energy and climate changes, so a lot of natural disasters occur in developing countries too. And then the last kind of factor that I talked about is unsafe conditions for childbirth. So obviously we hear about childbirth-related deaths occurring in the United States for mothers and babies, but it's pretty uncommon. But that's because 99% of childbirth and pregnancy-related deaths actually occur in developing countries. And this is because, as you probably guessed, people don't have access to proper prenatal and postnatal care. So things like post-op bleeding and preeclampsia are a lot more common in these places. The next thing I talked about are some common health challenges. So one of the first ones, this is also can be a cause of other health challenges, but just as a health challenge itself is malnutrition. So 45% of deaths in children below the age of 5 are caused by malnutrition. This is one of the leading causes of death in young kids. 2 billion people worldwide are malnourished. So if you think about that, that's almost 1/3 of the whole world population, which is a lot of people and something that people should probably care about a little bit more. Something that I thought was really interesting while I was doing research was that underweight and overweight people can be malnourished. I feel like a common misconception is that malnourished people are always underweight, but this isn't actually true because a lot of the time unhealthy food is obviously cheaper than healthy food, but it has fewer nutrients. So if there's more sugar and fat in food, then people can be overweight and still not have the proper nutrients that they need. Another common problem is malaria. So the common knowledge with this is that it normally occurs in Africa. In this case, that conception actually is true because 92% of annual malaria cases do occur in Africa. It's most common in tropical and subtropical developing countries because it's caused by mosquitoes, which are normally a lot more common in tropical places around water. So yeah. And then also HIV and AIDS is really not common in the United States. You hear sometimes about people having HIV, but it's really not very common. And it's also less common that it's going to progress to AIDS, which stands for Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome, which is basically when all of your white blood cells die off, and not all of them, but a lot of them die off, and you can't fight off diseases anymore. So as most of you probably know, it's a sexually transmitted infection, but it can also spread through blood-to-blood contact or from mother to child during childbirth. Some of the symptoms before it progresses to AIDS, so when it's just the HIV virus, are less severe. They're more flu-like, kind of sore throat, headache, fever. And then after progression to AIDS, you're going to be a lot more susceptible to different diseases, but also kidney failure, other organ failure can be a problem as well. And then some risk factors for HIV, pre-existing conditions, unprotected sex. And then lastly, everyone's current least favorite topic, how COVID-19 has impacted these countries. But hopefully this can kind of bring a new perspective to it and some things that you haven't heard before. So some of the factors leading to a greater COVID-19 impact in these countries are a lot of the same factors that contribute to normal health problems in these countries. So overcrowding is a big one because, as we've all seen from the CDC on every single news report, social distancing is one of the main ways to prevent the spread. But when people live in overcrowded communities, a lot of the times they can't social distance, so they're going to be more exposed to contracting the virus. Again, a lack of clean water and sanitation, another big way to prevent disease, washing your hands. Without clean water, that's pretty hard to do. And then limited training for healthcare professionals. So people can't get proper treatment for COVID-19 because a lot of the healthcare professionals in these areas aren't properly trained. And then socioeconomic disparities. So these are just differences between places of higher income, places of lower income. So again, overcrowded communities, a lot of people, we've seen this in the United States a lot of minority groups and like the homeless, other groups like that, are living in really overcrowded areas that aren't safe because there's higher exposure rates. This is also something interesting that I found when I was researching. There are these things called the social determinants of health, which are basically the conditions where people live and work. So like your working conditions, what kind of job you have, where you live. These things are all kind of what they sound like, things that contribute to health that aren't actually related to medical things or underlying health conditions. So obviously if people are working in unsafe conditions or if they're living in unsafe conditions, they're going to be more susceptible to contracting the virus. Also, there's greater all-cause mortality in places, developing countries, and lower income areas. And all-cause mortality is just mortality that's not related to the coronavirus, so related to other diseases, a lot of the things that I talked about earlier. So the reason for this is that a lot of resources are diverted to COVID-19 in developing countries, but since they don't have very many resources to begin with, a lot of the other diseases that I talked about are kind of neglected and people don't get proper treatment for them. Also, inability to transport goods and inconsistent food prices kind of go together. So obviously with inconsistent food prices, people are going to be at a high risk for malnourishment, and deaths from that are going to increase. Inability to work from home. A lot of people in underdeveloped areas have kind of essential jobs where they can't work from home, like they can't just go online. So they're going to expose themselves more often. And then lack of medical resources. Obviously there are a lot of medical resources that developing countries are lacking, but two of the main ones that we've seen with coronavirus are personal protective equipment, so PPE, and ventilators. So I'm sure we all saw a ton of news stories kind of earlier and around April when the lockdowns were happening about how a lot of healthcare professionals in the United States didn't have the right personal protective equipment because we had a big shortage of like masks and gloves. So a lot of people had to rewear their masks for a long time, which is obviously not sanitary and is going to expose you and put you at a higher rate of getting the virus, which is going to lead to a shortage of healthcare personnel. And then in developing countries, a shortage of ventilators is a big problem. So with COVID-19, one of the main big problems that we've seen is that as the disease progresses, it can lead to respiratory failure. So if you can't breathe anymore, then pretty much the only treatment option is for you to be put on a ventilator so they can breathe for you. But without ventilators, people in developing countries don't necessarily have a treatment option if they're going into respiratory failure. So I think there was a study that I read that said that in India, I'm pretty sure it was India, there were like there were a super low number of ventilators for a super high number of patients. And then everyone's favorite topic right now, COVID-19 vaccinations. So in the United States, obviously we've seen these beginning to be distributed to healthcare workers and high-risk populations, but in developing countries, two of the main things that the organizations that actually give out the vaccines are looking for are countries' obviously ability to afford the vaccines, but also ability to distribute them. And some organizations like Gavi, which is the Global Alliance for Vaccine, actually don't exactly remember what it stands for, but something along those lines. It's helping to subsidize vaccines for countries, so it's helping to pay for vaccines for low-income countries. But this still isn't enough to pay for all of them, because obviously there are a lot of people who live in developing countries. But another thing that developing countries can't properly do is distribute vaccines. So if some of you know, coronavirus vaccines normally have to be refrigerated, and there's a pretty short window of time when they can be taken out of the refrigerator and given to people. And a lot of populations in developing countries are really spread out, so there's not a way for them to properly distribute them to everyone that needs to get them in time. So that's the last slide I have, but just some thank yous. I didn't make a slide for it, but I'm just going to go off the top of my head. So thank you obviously to my parents and my friends for always supporting me and for giving me some ideas on things to research and ideas for places to look. Definitely thank you to the World Health Organization and CDC, because I use those sources a lot. Thank you to Ms. Morgan for looking over my final paper and helping me edit it. And obviously Mrs. Tyler and Ms. Spindle for running this program, helping all of us come up with our project ideas and helping us finish them. So, any questions? Okay.
How does COVID stack up or rank against other more common diseases in other development?
So if you look at a lot of like the death reports and like the mortality rate reports, a lot of the developing countries actually don't stack up as high compared to the U.S. because obviously the U.S. right now has like the highest rate of deaths and stuff. But these countries are, so probably for like mortality, other problems that I talked about earlier on are probably a bigger issue in causing deaths. But with coronavirus, they just have way less of a way to actually like prevent it and treat it. So if it did become more widespread in those countries, then it would be a way bigger problem than it is in the U.S. So,
what are some of the best ways that we can use that help the issues?
yeah, so one of the things that, which obviously not everyone can do, but I think a really important thing is that people who are doctors and who are trained in healthcare can contribute whenever they can. So, you know, being willing to work for free and being willing to help out in these countries. Obviously for us, we can't like help distribute vaccines in these countries right now, but just kind of knowing about the issue and being able to spread awareness and make sure that people know about it is really important. Okay, so if that's one question.
Let Sarah ask, because I think she asked what I was going to ask, but I couldn't understand you, sorry.
She said, like, what are some ways that we can help?
Okay, that is exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Good job.
All right, thanks.
All right, well, thank you all so much for coming to our first full night of Brother Bernardine presentations. I know that this has been a long road for these seniors to get here. We normally do them in October, but I wanted us to have the opportunity to be with them and to hear them in person, and I knew that that wasn't possible for us in October, and so I tried to just push them back as long as I could. And so thank you, especially to the seniors, for being patient. I know this has been a long road for you all as well, but we are getting there, right? Like, you're presenting your projects, you're so close, and I think just absolutely fantastic job tonight. Great information, really interesting stuff. So kudos and great work to you guys. So please join us for our next presentations, which are next Wednesday on February the 3rd at 6:30 p.m., same time, same place, right here in the STC auditorium, where we will have, and I'm going to get this wrong, Diego Gonzalez, Teresa Tran, and Caroline Ernst. Those are our three presenters for next week. And again, same time, 6:30, right here in the STC. So, and if the four of you will hang around, I want to get a picture before you all leave. So thank you all so much for joining us. Live Jesus in our hearts.